the welfare department. And I want, first of all, to commend the former minister for allowing the good constituents who live in the epicenter of Christchurch the opportunity to have an office in the Silver Hill Center of Excellence. And to say to you, and I want to commend the officer that you have put there, his name I want to call openly to commemorate his efforts, Mr. Fabian Jones. And I want to thank the welfare officer who is just a phone call away from my constituents. But I want to allude to other issues in the welfare department, because oftentimes as I traverse this country, I often hear persons say, when you go to the welfare, it appears as if nobody cares about their welfare. And this has bedeviled every single administration since elective politics. I kid you not. I want to know, first of all, what are we going to do to ensure that the welfare department becomes more engaging? In light, of course, that we have COVID. And oftentimes the offices, the physical offices, are closed. I want to know what the welfare department is doing to ensure, with a press of a button, using the technological and virtual spaces available to persons. Is there a hotline number? Is there a WhatsApp number? Is there an Instagram, a sphere where persons can engage with the welfare officers in record time? Because at the end of the day, these are emergencies that we are dealing with. And following up to that, I also want to know if there is a change of dress code. I have a situation where it pains me to have to discuss with anybody in Barbados where a young man is serving 2 years in prison because he had an encounter at the welfare department and they had deemed him inappropriately dressed. I want to know in this time that we are living, where it is understood that the indigent goes to the departments to see assistance. They may have one pants, one shirt. I'm getting real now. I want to know what is the department doing to ensure that those persons are accepted, because the Bible tells us that you can come just as you are. And we must be able to tell persons in Barbados they are able to come and access services just as they are, irrespective of however they are dressed. Please, I want to know from your department what is the welfare doing to ensure that we are able to access all and sundry. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Minister. I would allow the Chief to respond before I give comment.
Thank you, Minister, for your question. Minister, perhaps I should, at the risk of being repetitive, point out that we are very much inundated with requests from the public. Our complement of staff have remained the same, whereas the applicants have tripled and in some cases quadrupled. You would appreciate that during the COVID period, there was a suspension of face-to-face interviews, and we were therefore conducting those interviews via telephone. Our records are showing over 13,000 calls a month. Minister, I'm sure you can appreciate that, as my PS alluded to earlier, if an officer is interviewing a client, they cannot take another call. What we're doing or trying to do is to utilize the technology more. We have engaged our service provider to assist us with an auto attendant, where all the calls coming in from all across the island are going to one receptionist. We're now trying to get those calls rediverted to the appropriate officer so that persons can leave at least a personalized message. But that still remains challenging. We are, and we have engaged with MIST to provide us with an electronic solution where we are, and actually I can say that our ministry really is in the process of building out a management information system, which would allow clients to go on a portal, look up their application, track it, see if it is approved, and when the benefits are to be distributed. We are definitely doing the best we can with the limited resources that we have. As it relates to dress code, the welfare department was not peculiar in having a dress code. At the time, I would say the majority, if not all, government institutions had a dress code. We have reflected, we have heard the complaints and the concerns of the public, and we have adjusted accordingly. So I do not think that that would be an issue going forward. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you as well, Minister. The chairman has me under heavy manners, so it will be very brief. The question of attitudes in the social services sector, and particularly in welfare, has come up during the course of this conversation. It has come up, regrettably, on a number of other occasions. We've said during the morning's presentation that we intend to, I think the Parle said it, to be offering training. I hold the view very strongly that even in the face of intense pressure and fire, we have to hold the line, and we have to be able to receive it with grace, and that the training we must offer and the place to which we must get must be a place where even in the face of the pressures that the Chief is speaking of, that we are able to respond with grace. But I say that very cognizant of the fact that the pressures are real, and that the persons who are coming before the social services agencies have increased in significant number. I also ask the public as well when they interact. I know that people are going through very difficult circumstances, but also to, if they can, conduct themselves in a way too, so that it must be a reflection on both sides. But I have zero tolerance and zero appreciation for people being treated badly when they visit these particular institutions. I also feel that unlike, and this is perhaps very different in thought, unlike other government agencies, the social services sector must appreciate that they will interact with people whose circumstances do not allow them the benefit of being able to dress well all the time. And it's not a job interview, So I feel differently. I know that that is no longer the reality in the welfare department. And as we go forward, we will make every effort to ensure that persons are treated well when they interact with the social services agencies. And I heard you, and I take your point. But I also want to offer a little bit of clarity and to say that in the last 3.5 years, the questions are the same and the movement is the same. I do think there has been some progress. I would not be being truthful to myself if I did not say that I thought under Minister Ford there were some serious improvements in the ministry, and that therefore perhaps what we need to do is to articulate clearly what those improvements were and to communicate better some of the areas where we will continue to improve. But I hear you and I take your point, Minister.
I can remember when I first visited the Ministry of Environment and National Beautification. I had a similar issue as it relates to the sanitation and getting the information out. And I'm glad that your chief alluded to the fact that you will be having a hotline or a 24-hour response system. I'm happy to hear that. My second question has to do with the Battered Women Center. I know that the Barbados Professional Women's Club is an integral part of having that center fully functional for women who are in need of transient assistance. I just want to know from you, we recognize, of course, this is an acute intervention, but from a long-term perspective, because most of those cases you often hear end up in the same situation that they were in before, the same circumstances. They go back to being exposed to the environs of abuse. What is doing, I don't know if it's a psychosocial program that you have in place, a program that would ameliorate these situations, but what is being done from a permanent perspective to ensure that we have less of this happening? Because I am absolutely sure that this is something that is a concern to your ministry.
Thank you, Minister. The Permanent Secretary will begin to answer the question, and thereafter I will call on the Director of Gender Bureau.
Thank you for that question, Minister Ford. The ministry, as you indicated, has a very close relationship with the Barbados Professional Women's Association, and the government contracts that agency to run a shelter for women and their children who have been abused. The program within that shelter, though, is not only providing food and accommodation. There are a range of psychological services that are offered to both the women and children. There's also skills development and other enhancement activities. The ministry, the Bureau of Gender Affairs, and the Barbados Professional Women's Association also works very closely with the Family Conflict Unit of the Royal Barbados Police Force. And as far as possible, together, we try to ensure that those persons do not fall back into the same environment. It is a very complex issue, so I'm not going to sit here to say that the Ministry of People Empowerment alone has a permanent solution for this issue of abuse, which is found across the world. What I will say is that we will continue to strengthen our relationships with the Royal Barbados Police Force and the other agencies to help empower these ladies and to help ensure that they can transition into a better way of living. What I can also say is that the ministry, in collaboration, is a program that was developed with UN Women, a Partnership for Peace program. And in that Partnership for Peace program, the ministry receives men who have abused women, and they're put through a 6-week program that is run by, I think, 3 or 4 psychologists. We receive gentlemen from the court, we receive gentlemen from their workplaces, or some men who voluntarily present themselves to the program. That program has been recently evaluated, and it has borne fruit to the point, I think we've done 16 cohorts of that program, and one of the recommendations is that we do a similar program for women as well. There are also other NGOs that are working with women who've suffered the scourge of abuse and so on. So it has to be a fully collaborative effort with the government, the private sector, the third sector, inclusive especially of the faith-based community. So I cannot say that we have a permanent solution. What I can say is that we will continue to work assiduously on this scourge against women. I'll hand over to the Director of the Bureau of Gender Affairs, who may have some additional information to add to that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Patricia Boyce, Director, Bureau of Gender Affairs. I concur with what the Permanent Secretary has just said. What I would like to add, though, is that we recognize that there's a need for transitional housing, because when persons go to the shelter, it is only for about 6 months. We know that housing solution in Barbados is an issue at the present moment, so we still have to look to see how we can address that issue. What we've also done, though, we recognize that when persons go to the shelter, sometimes they don't have any place to store their possessions. The club has reached out to the ministry, and the ministry is seeking to assist the club in this area. We've also have a committee on gender-based violence established. We have representatives from the various departments in government that will deal with the issue of gender-based violence. And through that committee, we're looking to help sensitize persons on the issue of what is violence, symptoms of red flags in terms of violence. And we also, from that committee, is supposed to develop a national plan on gender-based violence. Those are the initiatives that we're trying to address at this moment.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. My last question has to do with the children's homes. I know that therapy is 50% psychological, probably 50% physical. And when we drive around, we see those children's homes. Sometimes I often wonder, what's the effect of carrying persons in a home that is not as aesthetically pleasing as we would imagine. And I know that the former minister, the Member of Parliament for St. Thomas, would have done tremendous work with the Sandy Lane Trust and other organizations to rehabilitate those homes for the children. I'm quietly confident that there are plans afoot to have the Sterling home remodeled for the purposes of having our children home. And sometimes you have to reflect, because I don't call it the house. I really call it the home. And there are certain tenets that would represent the whole concept of a home. Luther Vandross alluded to a house not being a home unless there's someone there to hold you tight, someone there to kiss you goodnight. And the reason why I want to locate this conversation the reason why I want to locate this conversation right now to this type of relationship between love and care and having that ambience of home and family is because I know a lot of times when those children are placed in homes, they're separated from their mother. They're separated from their father. They're separated from their loved ones. Is there any plan in place in your ministry to have a coexistence where the parents could live in the same facility as the children, especially in those homeless situations? I just want to know if there is a plan to bring an entire family rather than having just the children separated, so that you will have that connection, as I spoke about love and care and all those things that we can associate ourselves with as Barbadians or Bajans. Thanks.
Minister, thank you so kindly for your question. I will say very few words and allow the Deputy Director of the Childcare Board to speak to this issue. I had the fortune of being the manager of the Childcare Board for 5 years, and I know the agency well. And so I won't speak to the specifics, but I do trust Mr. St. Hill will. But all I want to say is, as I begin, I want to thank the Barbados Children's Trust, and I want to thank the Sandy Lane Trust, but I want to thank really the Children's Trust for the work that they have done to remodel Fars Children's Home and the properties at Nightingale, to the extent where I believe these children's homes, aesthetically is your word, are so much more aesthetically appealing than the majority of the houses in which most Barbadians live. So I want to begin by thanking them, and I would allow Mr. St. Hill to address the question.
Good afternoon, Colin St. Hill, Deputy Director of the Childcare Board. Yes, Minister, you are absolutely correct that within the children's homes, it's really people there. There are people there who hug those children, who kiss those children, and who put them to bed and tell them good night. These are persons who, especially during these COVID times, would have gone beyond the call of duty in providing the necessary support for these children within our children's homes. But there is no one like your mother or like your father. So the Child Care Board would be constantly working with the parents who are still out in the community for various reasons. Some of these children would have to enter our children's homes. So we continuously work with these parents to see if we can reunite the children with their families, and that is the role that we take. So we recognize that children need their natural biological family, and we work towards that. But the actual children's homes, within those homes, the facilities are really excellent. Part of the problem sometimes they are so good that sometimes the children don't even want to leave because they have beautiful television, beautiful furniture, they get regular meals every day, they get the supervision of the aunties who ensure that their schoolwork is done, they go to church. So they are given the necessary support that really each child should have, but can never replace that support of their natural mother or father. As it relates to having children and with their parents in one unit, that is really, at this time, not the role of the Child Care Board. Within our home setting, we provide the facilities for the children, and we work hard to get those children back out in the community. If, for example, the welfare department provides assistance, if the problem is one of housing and rent could be paid, then the children will go into that unit. National Housing also assists persons if the problem is one of national housing. So we work with other agencies in order that families really could stay together wherever possible. When that is not possible, and rather than a child having to stay on the street, and I think we should recognize the efforts of governments over the years, because within our society, we don't have street children. Within other societies, this is a problem. In Barbados, we don't have that problem, because that is where our children's homes comes into play, or our foster parents. So I think we have been pretty blessed and fortunate to a large extent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just very quickly, Minister, you know me well enough to know now that I take very seriously to where people live and where people work. We took the same approach in the markets, and I assure you that in the properties that are under the control of the Ministry of People's Empowerment, where people work, or in cases where children have to occupy them, referring now specifically to the day nurseries, even those under our care, that I will make sure that I make every representation to make sure that the facilities are good. And thus far, we've started the initial work and the initial assessment, but it will not be a case where this ministry and the people who work in it and the persons with whom we have to interact find themselves in conditions that are below human habitation. And so I also give you the assurance, Minister, that the conditions in this ministry, those that are not already up to scratch, will become up to scratch very soon. And I say that cognizant, too, of the fact that the welfare office, the main office, and the conditions under which the chief welfare officer and her staff are, to me, they're compressed, it's too small, it's fragmented. I really feel we need to find a new place of work for the persons in that department. So there are a number of things that we're going to be working on, but I assure you, making sure people are comfortable and our clients are comfortable is one of my most urgent priorities.
I just want to say thanks to you, Minister, and I'm absolutely clear, confidently so, that that your heart, your soul, and the entire ministry is in the right sphere to execute your mandate and your policies. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This, based on what I've heard so far, it suggests that we do not have a superficial approach to the assessment of social issues. And most persons seem to indicate that we do not put the professional social services and policies and programs into playing any secondary role in relation to some of the other disciplines that we often talk about in here. So my view is that this discussion really requests deep contemporary social thought and new formations out of this based on what I've extrapolated from what the minister said earlier. We intend to put in place new formations in a very pragmatic, in other words, I sense some form of pragmatic objectivity coming out of the contributions that are being made. I want to suggest, I'm not going to make the questions too long-winded. I want to suggest, sir, that, or ask, how can we expedite? I know the minister indicated that in 1 year, and I want to say that we normally spend 5-year terms, or sometimes we end up spending 3.5. In 1 year, we want to see something happen, because I've been minister in up to 2008 of this specific ministry with with the same departments. And the minister was also director of social policy and planning. And some of the things that we're going over here, I don't want it to be an exercise in just superficial conversation. So I want to suggest that we can move swiftly to achieve some of these things in a very pragmatic way. And let me put it in question form. Can the minister establish a relationship right away with the University of the West Indies, social science facilities there? The University of the West Indies has a lot of research papers on the specifics of childcare. Lots of people write theses on some of these things, delinquent behavior in relation to children who have been on welfare for a considerable time. I would like to know that we have to go over research papers now, trying to find out if during the time children and our parents are on welfare assistance, if we have seen an escalating record in the delinquency of people's behavior. All that are studies that, all of those things are studies that can be found in the University of the West Indies. So I'm just trying to find out if we have established that relationship where the university students, especially final year students, can do that research and share that research with the welfare department and some of the other agencies as well. And in return, we can grant them permission under all the required restrictions to have access to some of the records of the welfare department and the other social agencies that they can do the appropriate studies.
Minister, again, thank you so much. Before I answer your question, let me just say that the proper name for FARS is now the Marina Brewster Home at FARS in St. Peter, and so I would like to give it its proper title, and also to say that the ministry can be contacted at 536-HOPE, 536-HOPE, or 536-4673. Minister, I cut my teeth in the ministry under yourself and under Hamilton Lashley. And most of my early community work was under Hamilton Lashley, and I've always, as you know, admired your own work. So both of you men are men of very practical enterprise. And the idea that I have been mentored by the both of you to then engage in a laborious use and waste of time would be contrary to the initial training that I received at the feet of you two good gentlemen. So I must also tell you, Minister Prescott, that when we, Honourable Member, that when we were in the ministry, we had actually got fairly far in restructuring the ministry to this end. And in 2008, when there was a change in administration, we'd actually had a document that was fairly advanced. Not as advanced as where we are now, but fairly advanced. So it would be for me a very personal loss if I am not able to finish that which I know you all started, and even it was even started before you, because as I said, the report was in 1997. And I think, as you can hear from the members who are speaking here, the various heads of departments, all of whom are committed to the restructuring, I do believe that we will be able to see it through within the year. The other matter is, though, that while we restructure the ministry, because we must walk and talk and walk and chew gum at the same time, while we restructure the ministry, there are some practical things that we have to be able to offer to the people. There are some things that we have to be able to do now. We have to treat people better immediately, one. I feel as well that the 24-hour that we can also do immediately, two, so that they feel our presence. There are a number of programs that I have hinted at are on in the public space, mostly as it pertains to being able to help the elderly, like the Senior Net program where they can be online and talking to each other, like the capacity for us to be able to help them with their medication and so on and so forth. And the mentor, where we work with young people and old people to build those relationships. I feel that we have to have immediate programs. In relation to the work that we're doing with the university, there's always been, for most of us, most of our institutions, a relationship with the university. Certainly I know there is a strong relationship between this ministry and the social work unit at the University of the West Indies. There's also been recent work with the university in terms of a situational analysis on the elderly. And that study has been, is being done, I think, by Dr. Devonish. There's also a client satisfaction survey, which will give us some idea as to where we stand in the eyes of the public and allow us to implement immediate corrective measures. The Parasec and I were discussing a view that we could also use more students as we embark on the work that we must do. And to be able to offer, as you can tell, we don't have enough social workers, and to be able to offer more support to the agencies, to persons who are in training but who probably have most of the necessary skills. So that this does not become a talk shop, it does not become just a cerebral exercise for us to speak about how intelligent we are. This has to be a practical intervention in the lives of ordinary people. And so I know that a lot is at stake here, that the welfare of people, and welfare in itself is a good word, it means that people are faring well. That's what welfare is, that people are faring well. So that the welfare of the people that we serve must be paramount. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel, and I won't do it. I've said to PS that we have, of course, to deepen the relationship with the university and to be able to access a lot of that data that is there as we move more immediately to be able to deliver an improved social service response to persons who are in need. And as we move for our larger programming, which is really and truly about empowering people beyond the social protection. So, Minister, I am with you. Honourable Member, I am with you. And I promise that we will continue the work that you started, that you were integral to, that Mr. Lashley was integral to, and move the baton forward.
Minister, let me thank you for acknowledging the quality of the work which I've presided over at the Ministry of Social Transformation, and also my inseparable friend, Minister Lashley at the time. It is unfortunate that you cannot benefit as much as you should be allowed from the experiences and the wisdom, especially of the elders, who can impart some very positive values in you. So I hope that I will have moments where I can have dialogue with you on the development of the welfare department as well. I want to look at poverty. I want to know exactly what is the status of poverty, especially within the last 10 years or so. Somebody indicated that there was a study. One was in the last one that I can remember is in there was one in the 1990s, and then there was one by Sally Sis as well, on living conditions in Barbados. And at that time, the indicators were that poverty was escalating at a very rapid rate And I would assume that if that was in times which were not so pleasant, in other words, simple language, bad times, now times are worse. I can only, based on imagination, without having to look at any scientific evidence, I could only imagine that the cataclysmic nature of the day makes those things even worse than the times when we were saying that it was declining at a rapid rate. I'm hoping that all departments, not just at the levels of the departments of the economy, but all departments would understand how poverty impacts on the quality of life of our people, impacts in the environment, it impacts in almost every other thing. And I'm asking, what are we doing? Because we have to combat and fight poverty as a country. And it should undergird almost every different aspect of our lives, because the people at the bottom are the ones who suffer severely when any changes are occurring in society. I just want to know what do we have a policy, or is the policy clear enough? How are we going to eradicate poverty in the country itself? I don't want people to just say it as an ideal type. Are the policies clear? Is this policy seen as underlining the direction in which we are going for the future?
The ministry must have a evidence-based approach to solving its problems and addressing needs and so on. So we will have an evidence-based approach. I know that the former Prime Minister, Arthur, used to always say that he came to public life to stop poor people from being poor. The current Prime Minister is always saying to me that we must complete the circle of enfranchisement, so she goes even further and talk about, and Prime Minister is talking about empowerment, like real empowerment, and what is that going to mean for ordinary people as we complete the circle of enfranchisement. In relation to the specifics on where we are with poverty, I would like to ask Ms. Rianne Gibson, who's a research analyst in the Bureau of Social Policy, to speak to where we are in relation to that. Ms. Gibson.
Okay, good afternoon, honorable members. My name is Rianne Gibson, and I'm the research analyst in the Bureau of Social Policy in the ministry. As the Honourable Minister Prescott would have mentioned, he spoke to previous years ago where there would have been the CALC study, which was done in 2010, the Country Assessment of Living Conditions with partnership of the CDB, and this would have provided evidence to guide our policies on developing social protection strategies to alleviate poverty and assist the poor. Then in 2016, the IDB did a similar study that would have given us some indicators of the level of poverty in Barbados. Presently, we are working on having another poverty study done with the Caribbean Development Bank, and this will guide our policy on poverty, because obviously we can't, unless we have an idea of what exactly is going on, we wouldn't be able to enact effective strategies. The CDB study, once we get that going, one component of this program would be a PPA, which is called a participatory poverty assessment. And this would, we go out into the communities, we have discussions directly with members of the public, with persons who are living in vulnerable conditions, to find out how they're living, what strategies they're utilizing, and how our programs can better their lives and better their social conditions. So that would be one step that we'll be taking as you ask, how do we plan to combat and fight poverty? I'll also mention, beyond the studies that we have done in the ministry, as you would have heard my colleagues say earlier, we have been taking new approaches to our poverty programming, as with the IC Bridge program before, as well as the Strengthening Human and Social Development program, where we take a more multidimensional approach to poverty, and we look to not only give direct financial support, may it be as a food voucher or to pay the rent for some person who is in a situation where they can't afford this, but we've also been looking to offer that psychosocial support. We offer aids in telling them how they can improve their health, offering training at Barbados Vocational Training Board to help give them the skills and the tools that they will need to not only have the immediate financial needs, but to also retool themselves to be able to find a job, to meet their needs, to build better family networks and better family support, because we also recognize that, yes, we may offer a program, but if we only offer this program to one person in the household and the relationships are still broken down, that the situation in the household overall may not improve. So to conclude to what you've asked, to combat poverty, we're looking to do study, to have the enhanced country poverty assessment, which will give us data to guide our programming, but we have also been taking new approaches to our delivery of programs to improve the lives of the poor and vulnerable. Thank you.
And allow Mr. Pollard very quickly and the Parliament Secretary very quickly, because I think it's a question worth some ventilation.
Thanks, Minister. Honourable Member, thank you for that intervention there. In addition to what Ms. Gibson said, what we are looking at on a continuing basis is an assessment of poverty. So we have what we designed. This is a homegrown tool, the eligibility score sheet. And the eligibility score sheet is a ranking of poverty in 6 categories. Well, you can say 5 because the lowest one is non-vulnerable. But in 6 categories, and that gives us an idea as to not only, so because as Rian said, we're looking at multidimensional poverty, so it doesn't only tell us who's poor, but it tells us how they are poor, specifically in what areas. So there are 6 dimensions to this eligibility score sheet. And these look at income, health and wellness, education, and 1 or 2 other. Housing is critical. Housing has the most indicators. Now, when we tally up the scores as we go out and we administer the assessment, as I said, we get to see the level of poverty and the type of poverty. So a person's looking at it from a multidimensional perspective. Persons may be poor, experiencing poverty with respect to housing, but on the other 5 dimensions, they might be okay. That helps us, therefore, to target particularly our poverty reduction programs to the specific needs. And you'll recognize from that targeting is important for us as we go forward with poverty reduction. So we are looking at it from a measurement perspective, so that outside of monetary poverty, we speak to multidimensional poverty and also incorporating in that intergenerational poverty. Rihanna alluded to the Strengthening Human and Social Development Project, and that is a project which has more or less practicalized our approach to treating with poverty to the extent that it is, as I said, the multidimensional approach. So thanks for that, your intervention. But we are going forward with that. The country enhancement, the enhanced country assessment of poverty will take us that much further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pollard, and also Ms. Gibson. I think they give excellent responses. For me, I just want to add and let persons understand that we have a philosophical underpinning and where this must be rooted. And the minister has said it a number of times today. We've got to move from the idea of just poverty alleviation to economic empowerment. We got to switch it up. We got to switch it up beyond welfare to the faring well of people. And that is what the ministry is about. Other members spoke to it when he talked about the name should really be social development. And that is where I want to locate my contribution at this time. When you look at crime in Barbados, a lot of times people point to the AG and the Attorney General, and I usually like to shift them away and let's look at the Ministry of Youth. Let's look at community development, because we got to look at prevention. The same thing must happen within this ministry when we understand, when we talk about, as the member asked the question, how do we really lift people out of poverty? And that must be located across ministries, the productive sectors, the Ministry of Housing and Commerce, Education. These are the ministries responsible really for the long-term lifting of people out of poverty. This ministry will do it through, like we said, through the strengthening human and social development, the programs that we have long-term, not just to give a man a fish, but as they take 200, 500, 750 families at a time and ensure that we do not have to be giving them on a monthly basis, but that they can stand on their own 2 feet. And it must be understood that the philosophical nature of this ministry is now we've moved from giving a man a fish because of the emergency social protection need due to the second pandemic that we find ourselves in. Lest we forget, we are also in the HIV pandemic as well. That we must now move from giving a man a fish to stabilize him or her to giving him that fishing rod and the ability and capacity to fish, and then giving them some vessels. It is time Barbadians be introduced to the concept in mass of wealth creation and so on, so that we don't just be surviving, but that we are thriving. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I got the impression that this program would only be successful. I recognize different arms, housing, education, but I wonder if there's any unit that allows the welfare to be able, or any of the other agencies to be able to reach into the housing program with the state itself. What it begs is that we have now a new configuration within government that when a department does extensive research in any specific area, we should be able to have a formal structure in place that we can talk to the Ministry of Education, talk to the Ministry of Housing, and not based on the whims and fancies of any board or any minister, but that should be part of the governance in order for us to address these problems. The welfare department must have had a rationale at some point, because the welfare department used to also construct housing for the needy. And probably we missed that point some time ago, and we shift the responsibility in the hands of the UDC and the RDC. But that is not the question I want to deal with, sir. I want to deal with a question that relates more to persons who we don't have anybody present here that would have been, no persons here that have had the challenges that the disabled community normally face. And normally if my colleague was here from St. James, he probably would have put these questions. The disabled community is at a great disadvantage. And I'm not talking about, I've seen white papers, green papers, and all these things on the disabled in Barbados. But every time there seems to be a quantum leap in the policies of the disabled, there's also a lull that the process goes back, goes on pause, and we have to wait probably 5 and 10 and so years again before something is happening as rapidly as it ought to for the members of the disabled community. I want to ask if we are going to see another intensive program of the installation of ramps across the entire, not just the urban communities of Barbados, but in all government offices, all encouraging of the private sector to get involved in a program. When I was minister, the disabled community met with me once at St. George, sir, and they told me that they would be happy to come into town, but there are no proper toilet facilities in town. They can't use their wheelchairs when they get into town. And if nature calls, they are in an embarrassing situation. So we're talking about ramps in the city and outside of the city as well. We're talking about appliances in the government housing units. We're talking about government housing units designed to suit the demands of the disabled community, small ramps, bedroom facilities downstairs. Not disabled people have to forced to sleep in chairs and a folding bed downstairs because they can't get up the stairs and so on. So we're talking about toilet facilities, we're talking about signage. I think that we need to have contractors and architects taking all these things into consideration if we are going to have that kind of inclusiveness in the government policy. So I want to find out. And another thing is that there's not enough recreational therapeutic facilities for the disabled community or physical facilities that is suitable for the disabled community. So I'm just asking where we are in terms of not just sustaining, but giving a rebirth to that policy as we go forward. I don't want it just to be a theory in terms of the policy, but again, pragmatic application of the theory itself. I hope that I am clear enough, because I have so much to say about that. But I hope I'm clear enough, sir, that you can help me put the question if necessary.
Minister, Honourable colleague, thank you so much for your question. I must tell you, we visited the Council for the Disabled, and we visited the NDU. And on that visit, I had a chat with Rosalind Hurley. And Rosalind said to me, I am very happy to have you as minister because I know you fully understand the issues relating to the persons with disabilities, and that you will make sure that things are done. Now, it is with that kind of confidence being invested in me from someone in the community who has had such a long and leadership role and advocacy, I feel like I have a personal responsibility to deliver. And I give the assurance to the members in the disabled community that I shall deliver. And therefore, in relation to that, I would like the director of the National Disabilities Unit to speak again on some of the programs and programming and thoughts and think pattern in relation to what we've done and where we potentially are going.
Thank you once again, Minister. John Hollingsworth, Director, National Disabilities Unit. One of the first issues that you would have raised speak to a policy paper on persons with disabilities. I must admit that the last paper that was completed was a white paper, and that was done back in 2003, if my memory serves me correct. But we have seen the dearth of the information, and what we have planned to do, and it is enshrined within this next financial year's estimates, is to hire a consultant to conduct a study on the situation of persons with disabilities in Barbados, as well as to look at the implementation on the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So we hope to have that completed during the next financial year. There's already a provision for that. You also raised the whole issue of the installation of ramps. As I would have indicated before, the National Disabilities Unit hire private contractors to install ramps at the homes of persons who are in need of this particular service. In addition to that, we don't confine our efforts to the building or the engaging of the service of contractors to install the ramps at these homes. What we also seek to do is to advise both the commercial sectors and the public sector, even the Ministry of Public Works, into the standards that are necessary to make homes fully accessible for persons with disabilities. We would have done that with a number of private sector institutions, and we normally seek to have them conform to the building code of Barbados. We use that as the yardstick. You would have also mentioned the whole issue of accessibility in the city. And I am proud to say today what we have planned in a very short while is to have some parking spaces allocated to persons with disabilities in Bridgetown, specifically on those side streets that butt and bound Broad Street. And we have already had the commitment from the Ministry of the Public Works to have this instituted, because we are of the belief that it would be grossly unfair, it is grossly unfair, to have parking spaces allocated for whosoever may come, and persons park there for the whole day. And if there's a person with a disability who just needs to run a short errand, they would have to park in one of the remote car parks and make their way through the uneven sidewalks to get to conduct their business. So we have saw the need, and we're working feverishly to have some parking spaces allocated. To be more specific, by the parking spot by Nova Scotia, there by the Royal Shop, Tudor Street next to where Burger King was, and other locations in Barbados. We also hope to have some allocated in the new market, Fairchild Street Market, as well as near Golden Square, Freedom Park. So we're working to address those deficiencies as it relates to the accessibility within Bridgetown for persons with disabilities. And we would also seek to advise the NCC as well as to what facilities are deficient in terms of accommodating persons with disabilities. You would have also mentioned the whole issue of housing through the National Housing Corporation. What we seek to do, where possible, is seek to advise, especially if we go to a client and we recognize that there is an issue in terms of their living conditions, what can be done. The National Disabilities Unit do not hire carpenters and masons, and the limited budget that we have of $400,000 for this financial year to construct ramps and handrails, we try to spread it as far as possible. And at the going rate, we can only accommodate 50 persons. So we seek, as I was saying before, to engage the Rural Development Commission and the Urban Development Commission to make the necessary adjustments. Sometimes we assist them as well as the Ministry of Public Works, if they do work for a person who may be living, a disabled person living in accommodation that they may be providing some intervention service. We may even assist in having the ramp constructed, or as I would have said before, putting ensuring that the ramp is at the right gradient. We do some small adjustments as well in terms of widening doorways, because if a person becomes a wheelchair user sometime in their life, sometimes it would necessitate a need to have the bathroom entry and bedroom entry, and even sometimes the external entry adjusted to accommodate them suitably. Signage, one of the things.
Mr. Director, you need to wrap up your response as quickly, very, very quickly.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, trying to address all the issues that were raised by the Honourable member. In terms of the final one, I would address the whole issue of recreational facilities. One of the last things that we would have done at the National Disabilities Unit is to develop the grounds where the office is located on Lower Kalmarok to include a recreational and rehabilitative facility. This has now been developed to house recreational equipment through the kind compliments of the Ministry of the Environment and National Beautification, as well as other partners who have seen the project and have taken interest and are willing to donate additional equipment for this facility. Additionally, what we also want to do, where that is concerned, is use it as for the rehabilitative component for the adjustment to blindness officer to train persons who are blind to maneuver in an external environment and also within their homes. So those are the things that we're doing to address those concerns that were raised, because our intention basically is to make Barbados fully accessible. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. John.
Thank you, Chair.
Honourable Minister, I will be brief. I want to attach my questions to a couple words from the St. James Central member, performance indicators. Now, my questions, Minister, may have nothing at all to do with the constituency of St. John, but I want to ask some questions pertaining to the welfare department. And when I refer to performance indicators, these are the things that I'm trying to seek some clarity on. Is it a situation where welfare officers are issued with cell phones, and if so, is there a particular time of the day that they're not supposed to answer those phones? I'm asking the question to find out if there's a case in terms of performance indicators, if there are checks to see that a constituency is only submitting, for example, 4 requests for school uniforms. Is it a case where payment of rent, that you have almost 0 from within a particular constituency? These are the questions that I'm asking, Minister, in relation to performance indicators. Is it a case where welfare officers are stationed at a particular location and are never rotated? Because I am concerned, and I am getting questions from my constituents that I can't answer, so hence I'm asking you in relation to this. Because I may not be satisfied, and like I said, this may not be attached to St. John. I'm not satisfied that the performance of some of the welfare officers are what it should be, and I'm seeking clarity as to if there's any kind of evaluation in terms of production from the officers. So if you're in an area and you're seeing only 10 or so requests being made, is there anybody questioning the performance in terms of why the production in terms of assistance in a particular area is so low? I thank you.
Minister, thanks for your question. The Permanent Secretary will answer the question, and if necessary, the Chief will add some additional information.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member, for your question. What I will say is that at the whole of government level, the government has determined that it will engage and employ the commitment for results methodology. With that methodology and that tool, we will have specific targets, and there will be specific expectations and so on. So everything will be measurable. We're in the process now where we have developed our commitment for results documents, and we are waiting feedback from the professional that has been guiding this process. Now, we are also working towards, so that is for the overall government, for all ministries, for all departments. So the Welfare Department and all of the departments within the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, as well as the ministry itself, would have developed CFR documents. So that's the direction that we are going in. The ministry recognizes that there were shortcomings, and we are working towards the amelioration of those shortcomings. We are working in terms of retooling the staff. We are working towards training. We are working towards providing the psychosocial support that is necessary. We are hoping that we can engage the Ministry of the Public Service in terms of possibly increased numbers of staff, especially as it relates to the social work function. The CFR itself is, as I said, is a monitoring and evaluation tool. So all of the questions that you have asked, should be answered as we go forward. I would like to think that we are at this point in time turning over a new page where the social development ministry is concerned. I think the recent speech of the president would have made similar assertions. I understand from the overall government policy is for transformation. So I can assure members that we are working very hard to ensure that from a social protection, social development perspective, that transformation will take place. I think that's what I will say at this point, Minister.
The Chief speak very quickly, but thank you so much, PS. I think you answered the question.
Minister, you said she spoke quickly. I'm not sure that any of my questions were really answered. In the interim, while all of this is being put in place,
Minister was now allowing the Chief to respond to
right, but I understand that, Minister, but I'm responding to your PS because in the meantime, while all of this is being put in place, there's still persons that are being disadvantaged. And we're talking about a process that is being proposed. I'm talking about now.
Chief Welfare Officer.
Thank you, PS. Minister, I have to admit, I'm a little disheartened at your comments. To suggest that there is that we're not being productive is really not true. What I would say is to take you back to some statistics. We have moved from 3,000 people on the register to over 6,000. That's work, Minister. That's phone calls, that's visits, that's requisitions, that's people in our account section having to turn that into something tangible for the clients. Same thing for food. Food has moved from a couple of years ago, 7,000 to now close to 12,000. That's work. So I am disappointed to hear you say that, but we will continue to do our best, and hopefully our best will be good enough. Thank you.
So, Minister, before you come back in, Minister, I want to say that I understand your concern in relation to measurable results, like what are the benchmarks by which we determine success? What is it? The number of persons we've seen, the number of calls we've taken, the number of persons we've responded to. Those are the kind of indicators I imagine that you have an interest in, and I suspect that information can be presented to you. And perhaps we may not be able to give it to you now, but I make the assurance that those indicators that you speak to, the ones that currently exist, will be made available to you. But as part of our reflection on the ministry and part of our desire and determination to ensure that the ministry is evidence-based and that our approach to interventions are targeted, we will reflect on the indicators. And of course, to more specifically, we will reflect on what we determine to be a proper outcome and a consequential proper result, which is where I imagine that you're going with your question. So some of the information now exists, and I will make that available to you. And where the level of information that you need is not there, after we've analyzed it in-house, then we will make adjustments to make sure that the public can rest assured of the steps that we've taken beforehand, so that they know what we're measuring beforehand, what we're evaluating beforehand, and to make that as thorough for the public and for those who wish to see that information.
Minister, my final comment is this. I'm hearing global numbers. I'm hearing 13,000 calls. Maybe I should localize it and speak specifically to the constituency of St. John. And if you're telling me that you can make that information available, I would appreciate it. But to come and to drop global numbers and tell me that, anyway. Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, Minister, I'll let the parallel speak, but I just want to tell you, based on what I know, there's data in welfare, there is data in the ministry that is available, that is broken down, that would give you the kind of information that is not a global representation. And so that's what I'm saying. I want to be able to give that information to you. I suspect that were we to prod deeper, even here, we could give you more of the information that you seek, but that the information that allows closer analysis to maybe local communities or smaller geographical locations or smaller demographic spheres could also be given to you. And I understand that that's the kind of information that you're looking for, but I think the Parasec has a quick contribution to make.
Yes, Honourable Member from St. John, I understand where you're coming from, and for me, two things can exist and to be true at the same time and exist in the same space. So I want to give you comfort. I don't know if you would have been following our presentation all morning long, but I do believe that the majority of your question was really answered before in various parts. I would just seek to summarize it and bring it into one space right now. If you look at the ratios, you talked about indicators. The reality is that if the indicator is 1 to 50, 1 to 60, and you got an indicator that's ridiculous, let's say 1 to 500, the reality is that the officers are doing well. They could be doing well up to 200. So they are really doing well at the international standard. At the same time, with the overwhelming thing, the burden and so on, there are some people who will be acting unsatisfactory to you and others, myself included. And we've outlined all morning and all afternoon long the steps that we are putting in place to improve such, like the bringing in of additional officers through the volunteers, through the social workers, through the University of West Indies, and the management information system, which will be able to track these things, working with international partners. The ministry have given a list of initiatives in order to improve what you, myself, Minister, all the other colleagues in here experience, and we appreciate the fact that we're moving in the right direction. So for me, as we bring all of these things together, we continue to commend the Welfare Department working in, serious times with all the things that we face. And as the Minister said, and I echo, where there are those bad apples and so on, and the reports are being brought, I spoke to the DPM earlier, the Deputy Prime Minister, in relation to where do we find accountability. And the Minister said, and I will echo it, that we will have zero tolerance for that, and where it is brought to our attention, we will deal with it. But we understand that it is more a case of a burdensome load and ratio that we are seeking to correct. The other thing is, I'm sure that you share the confidence that we have in this economy, the Minister of Finance, in relation to getting the economy going, now that we're beginning to see, hopefully, fingers crossed, toes crossed, the end of the COVID pandemic, where the economic activity can pick up and those ratios will naturally be reduced. So I send you back to Martins Bay with total confidence and comfort.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Michael Northwest.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the good people of St. Michael Northwest for giving me this opportunity to act as the voice for the voiceless to those who I represent. I also would like to say to the Minister that I was formerly the parliamentary secretary once in that ministry. And I am confident in you, Minister, that you can produce honey with your right hand and don't pick lemons with your left. And suffice to say, sir, back in 2018, I can remember that the numbers that the Welfare Department was serving at that time was just over 3,000 clients. And I know without a doubt 4 years later that those numbers probably double or triple. And what I would like to know is that if you have 275 families being given welfare checks, and let's say 75 families requesting assistance to have their light bills or water bills paid, and let's say another 300 families from the city or from St. Michael South requesting to have their light bills and water bills paid, and another 150 obviously receiving checks. Let's say that is a total of 800 requests, obviously, that the accounts department within the welfare department have to process. My question to you, Minister, I would like to know if that department, the accounts department, actually have adequate manpower in being able to process these requests. Because I know that sometimes these things take time, and when a person have their electricity disconnected and obviously feeling the agony of waiting to have it reconnected, I know that obviously these things have to go through the accounts department, and I would really like to know if the department have adequate manpower to really handle the load of these requests that come in, not only from my constituency and from your constituency, Minister, and also the member for the city, but also other members, within this chamber. So my question to you, sir, I would really like to know if you have the adequate manpower to really handle the workload that is being presented, to the welfare department where the accounts department is concerned. That is my first question.
Thank you so much, honorable colleague. In an ideal world...
Honorable Minister, before you proceed, I would also like you to expound on the actual process with respect to these payments for when you're giving assistance with light bills, water bills, and so on, and give us an approximate time for the actual completion of the whole process before it actually gets to the accounts department. Because I'm sure there may be another department which is involved in this process as well, so that the public and honorable members will have a full knowledge, really, of what takes place when such requests are made.
Thank you again, honorable colleagues. I was saying to my honorable colleague from Northwest that in a perfect environment, we would have staff to do every single thing that we imagine to be necessary. And that, unfortunately, we do not live in a perfect environment, and that even as we came into office, there were tremendous challenges on the system. And the economic situation did not get better with COVID and so on. In fact, many would say it got worse, even though we handled it very well. So there may not be a case where you always necessarily where you always have at your disposal all of the staff you wish to have for all of the things you wish to do. And again, I am one to look at my circumstances and to make decisions. This is the hand that we were dealt, the cards that we must play. And it causes us now to reflect and to rethink and reimagine how we approach a lot of these things. There is, in a modern Barbados, no need for us to still be printing checks. I know there are some people who love to get checks, but I know there's another program where we lodge money to cards. We may have to look at electronic payments to try to ease the pressure. Where possible, it would be nice to have more staff. In any event, honorable colleague, we've said that the numbers have doubled. If the numbers have doubled, you could expect that there is going to be some impact on the system. And it is to the system that I turn and I say that we need a full overall review of the system and to have an adequate systemic response. But if you go across any department, pretty much in the government, and one by one, department by department, section by section. This morning, as I was coming in here, the staff from MTW were here, hoping to start this morning, and the conversation that I had with them was in relation to was it drainage? And, the lament was made that there's not enough staff. That's always going to be the concern. So I do not anticipate that to say here that we will have more staff is going to be the solution, but that we have to be innovative and inventive in relation to how we are able to respond. Now, as it relates to the process and procedures for making a payment as requested by the chair, I will let the Chief Welfare Officer speak to that, but I also know that a lot of these circumstances depend on the specifics of the situation, and that there may not be a single blueprint that finds favor with you, but that these situations are taken and weighed oftentimes on their own merit. But the chief will be able to offer some more information in relation to this.
Yes, thank you, Minister. I'm thinking your question was the process for these bill payments, the procedure. Once the person makes an application for a bill payment, they are first asked to fill an application form because it is not automatic. Then they have to be assessed and a decision taken. Once they are approved for bill payment, they are asked to bring the most recent bill to the office. They can bring it personally, or they can send it via electronic means. Sometimes when that bill comes, it is not the most current bill, and therefore we have to go back and ask them to review that or to send a new one. The one-off payments are quicker, which is where a person just wants to have their arrears cleared. We can do that, and that goes off to the electricity company. However, if it is a continuous payment where we've now added the person to the list, the utility company has to send a list to us at the end of the month for payment. And that doesn't always come at the end of the month. We have no control over when that list comes. So we are working with the utility companies to speed up the process. Recently, we've added the utility payments to our Samaritan system, which is our internal management information system, which would allow us to print the checks. And that has tended to speed up the process a bit. So we are trying to rectify this situation. Thank you.
Okay, Minister. My next question relates to those displaced families who were affected during the passing of Hurricane Elsa last year. I have a few families within my constituency that are back and forth with the respective department handling the process of, the cost of accommodation. Would you be able to shed some light on this issue?
Honourable colleague, the Parl-Set will begin to answer the question, and then the Permanent Secretary will address the question.
Honourable Member, you say you wanted some light shed on the housing of the persons who are displaced from Elsa, but I don't get particularly what it is you are trying to find out. Could you be clear?
In terms of the costs, covering the costs of the accommodation for these families.
We have, Honourable Member, we have obviously numbers as it relates to what it's costing us to house persons who are within the units. I must tell you, I think we have like 280 persons now, and an additional 40-something waiting to be accommodated. An additional 81, 46 one way and 30-something another way. So there's an additional 80-something persons waiting to be accommodated. It is obviously going to cost the government additional funds. We'd hoped in the original conversation these things were to be settled by March, the end of the financial year. We are now reviewing the cost because we obviously have more. There are people who are now transitioning to, people who are now moving away from the homes they were in as their houses are now beginning to be repaired. Some persons who want to stay who now have to move. So we're taking an evaluation now as to the final costing over the next few months. We're budgeting for an additional 6 months. And that costing I have to be able to present, of course, as you would appreciate, to my colleagues. I do not know that I wish to give now a dollar figure in relation to how much it is, but suffice it to say that it has been a substantial amount, and that we are working to make sure primarily that the persons are properly accommodated. I will take this opportunity, more importantly, to again make the call to Barbadians to come forward to offer their homes to be used in this process, persons who have rental units, persons who have apartments, and so on, to be able to be used for this purpose, to recognize that as good citizens, we are now being called upon to do higher service, to help persons who are in need. I had a message over the weekend, someone telling me that the the rate that we were offering was not enough for the property that he had, and given that he had a view to the beach. And this is not necessarily a tourism product. You know, we are not trying to respond as tourists. And this is a case of persons in need, needing assistance, and I am hopeful that Barbadians would do the right thing and come forward and make themselves available so to be able to help the persons. If you want further information, Minister, Honourable colleague, I will be happy to present it to you before we leave here or at a later date.
Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the Honourable Member Minister with responsibility for people empowerment and the past Minister for the work that is seeking to be done by this very important ministry to alleviate the challenging conditions and difficulties which our families face. One of my main questions was answered. I believe the Permanent Secretary spoke to the fact that they're providing some psycho-social support for staff, because I too, like other MPs, have concerns with the experiences that our constituents experience when they try to access the services at the Welfare Department. And based on the responses I've heard, I realize that there's also burnout that may be happening with staff, and that there will be a need for support, that they face an overwhelming level of demand that they're not structured for in terms of resources and people, and therefore they would need that support. So I'm very pleased to hear that support is being provided for staff to help them to deal with a very difficult job. The second question that I had pertains to the issue of elder affairs. My constituency of St. James South has primarily older residents. I have whole residential areas that you would seldom see a young family or see children, except that they're grandchildren. And therefore, the problems of aging have been predominant in many of my communities. This generation is one of the first generations that would have faced old age and retirement with 2 children and 3 children, as opposed to the 6 and 7 and 8 that previous generations had. And so there are fewer children or offspring available to assist the elderly and seniors in managing their senior years. This puts a great deal of burden on middle-aged children who have to cope with older relatives, while at the same time dealing with their own children, dealing with their careers. And so in between there, what is happening, we are gradually reaching a crisis in terms of our elderly population, our senior population. And this is a problem that as a country we must tackle and develop a series of initiatives to help us to deal with this. We're seeing the result in terms of elder abuse, abandonment, etc. in institutions, and therefore it has created a major problem. The question that I have for the ministry is, in this year's budget, what are some of the initiatives that you intend to initiate in order to work towards assisting with this problem of elder care and the issue of elder abuse?
Thank you so much, Honourable Minister. The Director of the National Assistance Board will address the question, please.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable members, Colleen Walcott, Director, Acting National Assistance Board. Minister has quite aptly identified some of the issues that our aging population is facing, and most predominant is the whole issue of the family dynamics. we are aware that the whole family structure is changing, and there is less support and more burden on family. The whole burden of care has been impacting families, and very often we do have the issue of elder abuse, and sometimes it's very unintentional. It has to have a dual approach where we have support for families as well as services that meet the needs of older persons in the community. The focus of the services will be home and community-based care. We would have recognized that there is a shift away from institutional care and keeping older persons in their environments so that they can age in place in their familiar environments. And the initiatives are to build services around older persons right where they are in their communities. And therefore, some of the initiatives that we'd have looked at, most persons will be familiar with the home care program, where that is just focused on activities of daily living. But older persons have more needs than those activities of daily living. So what about the instrumental care and the instrumental activities? And therefore, we would have the community elder care program, which focuses more now on the mental stimulation. So the initiatives will have a continuum of services which looks at the needs of older persons. So you will have that home care program, then you would have the community elder care program, which looks at social inclusion and companionship and having a presence there with older persons so that where they're living with families, and those families are out during the day, that at least there is provisions for their safety and their care. There's also, we have to look more closely at day care. We would have had one such facility, but there is also a demand for such services where persons who are in the workforce can go off to work knowing that their family members or their loved ones are being taken care of in a safe environment where their needs are being met. As it relates to elderly persons and the NCDs, that's one area that has to be addressed, and therefore one of the proposals is to have, as a part of the continuum of services, community nursing support. Yes, there are older persons within their homes who do not have, while their services in the polyclinics, they do not have access to them, whether it's because they're not mobile, they may not have the capacity to go, the family members, they may be living alone. And one of the things that we are finding also is that in terms of family and family dynamics, yes, you may have the families on location, living in the same house, but because of the fragmentation or the fractures and splinters within families, that is also contributing to the whole issue of elder abuse as well. So there has to be support for families, and there has to be ongoing education and sensitization. Very often we hear of the issue of abandonment, and we think that families don't care. But sometimes, while we may have those situations, families have reached the end of their tether, and they're no longer able to cope. They don't know what to do. So there also has to be supporters for families as well. So we have to bring some balance to it, where we are keeping persons in their communities, moving away from the institutional care, while we recognize that there will be persons who would need to be medically managed, who will need to be in institutions. But the first point of intervention cannot be delivery. We have to look at those services and how we can build out services and deliver quality services in the community, services which are timely, and which are consistent, and which are reliable. So you have the home care, elder care program, day care, residential care, transitional housing for those elderly persons who are displaced as well. So there should be a continuum of services.
I thank you for that. I certainly look forward to engaging your area more in relation to my communities in St. James South. There's just one recommendation I would like to make. I think I made it last time that you were here. And that relates to the fact that all of us will get old. So it means every family will be challenged at some point in time with elder care. And just as we've taken a lot of time to start, for example, financial literacy training, we want to do civics training, we want to provide the population with environmental training, helping them to understand that there are changes taking place and we have to adjust. I would like to suggest and recommend that we need to look at training in elder care for families, because I believe that the more they understand about the elderly and their needs, that you will get a better adjustment, a better understanding, a greater patience with being able to include and care and respond to the needs of the elders within our midst. So I would like to strongly recommend that to you. I'm obliged to you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Philip West.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I first want to thank the ministry minister for the support that the ministry has given us as it relates to working with students and families who are having some challenges as it relates to our students in the schools being able to access either electricity or other means for them to be able to be online and to do other work. We have collaborated with your ministry and we have gotten some good results, and we are relying on your continued support as we go forward. So I want to thank you first of all for that. My question relates specifically to Child Protective Services. Now, certainly over the last year and a half, as COVID has caused many families to be in enclosed spaces with each other under heavy pressure on occasions, we have heard, not only globally, but Barbados has in fact also noticed that there have been significant incidences where children have themselves been at the mercy of adults for whom they rely on whom they rely for care. And as adults and as a government, we must, as I know your ministry is, remain committed to the effort to ensure that every boy and girl, that they live free of abuse and neglect and exploitation. My question is, how is your ministry advancing in its commitment and its responsibility to create protective environments for our children, whether that relates to gathering the evidence to compel action, whether that relates to education of those who are offending as well as those who are victimized, whether it relates to legislation, whether it relates to other alternative facilities for care that are loving and high trust, or whether it relates to collaboration with informal and formal entities to be able to bring a whole of country approach to the protection of our children.
Thank you so much, Minister. I will ask the Acting Director of the Childcare Board to speak on this matter, Mrs. St. Hill.
Good afternoon once again. Yes, what we found initially with the COVID, families really were all remaining at home, and during those times you will find that the cases maybe would not be reported. But as the country start to open back up, you'll find that as children start to go to school, start to move around the streets, start to visit families, there are more and more cases that will be reported to the Child Care Board, and therefore we will continue to interview and investigate those cases when they come before us. We would have been in close partnership with UNICEF over the past couple of years in order to develop programs to educate the public and also to provide information to those children who might have been abused in terms of what they can do if they have been abused at any particular point in time. For example, Childcare Board in partnership with UNICEF, we have recently launched a child helpline app, which is a very child-friendly app, where children can go on this app and just provide information in terms of anything that would have happened to them, or even if they just want to have a journal to just write down their own thoughts and their own feelings. This is one of the initiatives that have been rolled out in recent times. Not only that, but the Child Care Board, along with UNICEF, we would have developed some special internet safety campaign messages. For example, there are over 6 benches that have been provided in terms of internet safety messages. One is at Sheraton Center, one is in Black Rock Community, the Fairchild Street, and Queen Elizabeth Hospital, which is simple messages in terms of internet safety. We also would have been continuing our public education in terms of sending messages through MIS and the government information services in terms of what is child abuse and what persons can do in order to keep themselves safe. The Child Care Board would have been working closely with schools, but unfortunately, because schools have been closed in recent times, we have not been able to go in there and get the message out in terms that we did previously. But now schools have reopened. We will once again restart our program in terms of good touch, bad touch, where we go into primary schools in particular and teach children from very early in terms of some of the things that are signs of child abuse, in terms of touches, which are good touches and bad touches, and what they should do in terms of if something bad happened to them. And this message is very simple: to tell someone, and to tell someone who they trust, and to tell and say until someone listens to them. So we will continue that approach in terms of trying to inform the general public what are some of the signs of child abuse, because we go to churches, we go to the schools, we go to PTAs. Any organization can contact the Child Care Board and request a member of staff, a child care officer, to come and speak on some of these issues. We work closely also with Parados in getting involved in the parenting program, and part of the parenting program of Parados also includes the messaging in terms of child abuse. So we use that approach in terms of getting the message out there and getting persons informed.
Also, to answer your question, I would let the PS just add a little bit in terms of our policy and legislative plans.
Thank you, Minister. The Cabinet last year would have approved a new child protection policy, which covered a range of areas, from institutional arrangements for child protection to mandatory reporting, treatment of children who have been formally charged with statutory offenses of wandering and refractory behavior, which court will have jurisdiction over child protection cases. There were some 9 or 10 recommendations which were placed before the Cabinet, which the Cabinet approved, which forms the basis of the new child protection policy. That policy was then used to develop drafting instructions for a new child protection bill, and that the work is now being done with the CPC. The CPC has asked the ministry some questions, which we are in the process of reviewing. So we are working towards modern child protection legislation. So this should this should be enacted sometime in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My other questions were answered earlier, and so I shall not delay the chamber any further.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Member for Christchurch East.
Mr. Chair, to the Minister. Minister, when people come to welfare, it's not that they do it, I guess, willingly. It's because they do it because they have to, right? So persons who approach welfare and who seek the assistance of welfare are persons who are at their lowest. And we've had the complaints about how people feel about how they are treated when they approach welfare, the lack of response, the lack of activity. And it may be that there is a communication issue, or it may be that we need to be sensitized as to how to deal with people across the board, especially in delicate situations. For example, just use a practical example. The immigration department used to be one of the most land-based departments in government. And people had everything to say about how immigration officers treated people and the treatment that they got when they went down to the immigration department. I dare say that the immigration department is probably one of the best functioning and more customer-oriented departments in government now. And whereas the complaints used to be furious, the commendations and compliments are even more so now. But that took a deliberate action, deliberate sensitization, deliberate approaches, putting the right persons in the right places, and changing the approach to one of a customer delivery, a customer service delivery organization. So where we see everybody who walks through the door as a client and somebody to be helped. We offer services, and in offering those services, we contemplate that people will use them. So I just want to know if there's any, I mean, we can't ignore what has been said and what is constantly being said about the welfare department and the approach of persons there. It may be valid, it may be a harsh criticism, but the point is it exists. So what are you and your department doing to change that public image? And if necessary, change the approach of some of the persons in the department so that it becomes seen as a user-friendly system, a user-friendly department, and one that persons who are at their lowest can actually feel comfortable in approaching for assistance.
Thank you, Minister, for the question. I will respond to this one. I believe the Chief Welfare Officer has in different forms, has answered questions very similar. And so I would just wish to say that given what has been said from all of the honorable members here, it is very clear to me that there is some work to be done in relation to this matter. I do not believe that my colleagues are asking these questions to be mischievous or to be difficult, but that these are the pressures that are brought to bear on them, as they are brought to bear on the Paralsec and myself, from our constituents. And that what we are bearing witness here to today is the reality of the times, and that persons are, in our constituencies, complaining about the way they feel when they engage the welfare department. I do not believe that these questions are being asked for asking sake. And I've always felt that there is a point in time where you have to sit and receive with grace things that are very challenging to accept. I also feel that sometimes we exist within a sphere of comfort that, you know, it's good sometimes for it to be rattled. And therefore, I do know that there are many people who believe that their situation is not being treated too fairly at the department. Having said that, we've listed a number of challenges that the welfare officers face. We've listed a number of issues in relation to the ratio, the client-to-officer ratio. We've listed the issues as it relates to the increase in the amount of persons who are coming before the department. We've also said that we are going to meet very urgently to start training in relation to a number of these issues. If there is a best model, and I do take the point, and I do not take it lightly, that the immigration department has now been recorded as one of the most improved departments in Barbados. And if there are certain things that can be taken from, obviously we can't take it wholesale, but if there are certain things and values that we can take from that as we go forward, We will take them. There can be no ego. There is no place for ego as we try to rectify these problems. And therefore, we come very humbly, and we will learn in the process. But it remains of paramount importance to me that people feel they are treated well when they engage these departments. And the fact that it keeps coming up is just a manifestation of the fact that it comes up to us over and over again. So, Minister, I think it is more than just an image thing. It's not about fixing the image of the department. We will do some of that with the restructuring. It's not even about the approach. It is about fundamental systems. It is about understanding the burden. It is about just being fair. And so as we go forward, Minister, I promise again that those of us who work in this ministry, those of us who work in this department, will do our best to ensure that we can deliver to the people in a way that makes them feel that they can still have contact with their dignity at the end of the day. But I do not want to make light of the reality of the difficult circumstances that are being faced daily by the department. But notwithstanding, we will do our best to ensure that we get this right, because it is fundamental to Barbados moving forward. It is fundamental to people being able not to eat, but to earn. And not only to earn, but to become entrepreneurs and to be empowered and to be part of the production class and have some relationship themselves to the means of production. I just see this as a necessary step to something so much bigger. You understand? So for me, this is important work, and I'm not just taking it as people's discontent with their treatment at whether it's welfare or NAB or any government department. I see it as something that we have to correct if we are to get the best of Barbadians and the best of Barbados.
I just want to thank you. As I said, it's not about land-based welfare. I've had some pleasant experiences with some of the persons there as well. It's just about, as a whole government approach to improving our delivery of services and the comfort of our clients. So thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you. We have the Honourable Member for St. Thomas, and then the Honourable Member for St. James North. We have another 15 minutes or so discussing this head, so I'm asking you to be really brief, be sharp with your questions and responses, because we have another ministry which should be examined, to begin to be examined this evening. Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I shall be very brief. I felt it my duty to raise just one aspect of the ministry, and then I will wish to add a comment immediately after. But I would want to indicate how happy I am to have seen and commend the Minister, the Honourable Minister, and the staff for the areas that they have been able to give responses to, acknowledging that the particular ministry is a very complex one. Every aspect of it deals directly with human beings and their development, and particularly that major objective of lifting people out of poverty, from being dependent to be able to become independent during the course of the programs. My concern is a big one. It is something we have been trying with, and only yesterday I was able, on my way here, to hear the calling program, and a person who is associated with funeral homes made some very poignant comments on the radio that are a part of what the ministry has been looking at previously. And he spoke about burials, pauper burials, as well as the extremely large numbers of persons that are now in morgues across the island, and the challenges with what is happening. We all know that COVID has taken over, and there are many deaths, and I want to take this opportunity to extend sympathy, not only on myself and the government and the people of Barbados, to those families who have lost loved ones. But the biggest challenge is that most of the people who are dying are very impoverished people, and they therefore cannot meet the demands for the costs of burials, even though how meager they want to be able to pay for the coffin or for the turnout, as we would call it. And therefore, I think it is really very important that there has to be some urgent treatment to this particular exercise. There's nothing more hurting than for a relative to die, and 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, they cannot be buried to bring closure, and they're grieving, or there's a lack of coroners, reports, and so on. And that is something that I believe that our ministry, meaning now the Ministry of People Empowerment, needs to continue to treat with alacrity because of the challenges that are there. They cannot meet the costs. What plan does the ministry have, or the government has, in relation to having funeral directors get some element of payment to assist with those burials, granted that the hospital and the other morgues are overloaded and their bodies there taking up critical space, not for 1 year or 2 years, sometimes 3 years. And therefore, if there's not enough space in the morgues, then those bodies are not properly frozen, or what, not frozen, but kept, preserved, let me say it that way. That is a problem for our society. They would want to know if the ministry has a plan going forward to further assist families that are impoverished to bury their dead and bring an element of closure to the particular exercise as time goes by. Acknowledging poor people as the major ones, because this situation we're experiencing, as you know, is the worst ever in the past probably 70 years. Hurricane, ashfall, COVID, and a large number of deaths, over 300, of which I believe about 250 are poor people. And therefore, I will want to hear, just in a nutshell, if the ministry has a plan, and rather than come back, I will want to take this opportunity to express my gratitude to the staff, and of course, to acknowledge the excellent contribution that the new minister and his parliamentary secretary are taking in moving forward with the policies that will not change in the way that people might expect, but going forward, they are building on the foundation that has been there, that I found that we've pulled together, and moving forward, because at the end of the day, it is a people-centered ministry that it calls for 24 hours of service. And therefore, the kind of funding, the kind of personnel working there, the kinds of facilities, the technology, whatever that is available, should be invested in it if we are to touch lives and turn them around. And that is my final comment. High commendations to the government in particular for coming up with that novel idea of including the elderly in a ministry, that the proper direction can be taken towards preserving their lives and their livelihoods, as well as looking after all others who are dependent, because that is the only way, particularly impoverished people, most vulnerable. And I just leave that question, and that's it for me for today. Congratulations to the Honourable Minister and his Parliamentary Secretary, but more particularly at this stage, because they've now come, the staff of the People Empowerment Ministry who have been out there day and night with every situation that occurs to be able to see how they can save lives and turn them around. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman.
Minister Ford, thank you. Honourable colleague, thank you so much for your comments. Of course, again, I just want to thank you for the work that you would have done in this ministry, and for the leadership that you've shown, and for your care and for your compassion in relation to this ministry and in relation to the people that we serve. I really want to thank you for your leadership on this matter. I know this particular issue is something that is of concern to you. You raised it with me as one of the first things you raised with me. Actually, I know, as we know, that the welfare currently does the pauper burials, and I think that name alone, I don't know if that's the official name, but that's the name that is shared. I think it's the destitute burials. That currently, where there are no resources at all, the welfare would make the necessary provisions to do the full burial. In relation where families find themselves in difficult circumstances, the department does upward to $3,000 to contribute toward the burial. And I know there's some challenges associated with that in relation to the fact that there's been an increase in the request, given the increase in the deaths in Barbados, and that there's some challenges in relation to families not necessarily wanting to do all the necessary documentation to make it easy for the welfare department to be able to execute their duty. In relation to the bodies that are stored in the hospital, at the hospital, I spoke to the Minister of Health, the current Minister of Health, very recently, and he tells me that there is a paper either with us or on its way to us that seeks to deal with this issue. There are a number of bodies being stored in the Queen Elizabeth Hospital because families were, for one reason or the other, unable to bury their dead. And that the cost of keeping the bodies in the hospital is more than would be the cost of burying them. And therefore, it would make sense for us to be able to bury the dead of the persons who are at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital and who haven't yet been buried. Of course, it is a deeper issue, and it speaks to the fact that many Barbadians are still facing economic circumstances that are very difficult to the extent that they're unable to be able to bury their loved ones. And so these are things that we have to be able to look on and to deal with. I am told that in some cases, or in one case in particular, it's a child. So we have to find a way to be able to address it. I think between ourselves and the Ministry of Health, we will be in a position to say to the country very soon, or at least to those families, that we can put them in a place to bury the dead, and truthfully, to be able for, I'm still a Christian boy, to find peace, and not have the bodies at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital. But it has attracted my attention. It has attracted the attention of the current Minister of Health. It is our determination that in the shortest possible time to be able to deal with this matter. And as we go forward, to make sure that it doesn't continue to reoccur. So I've heard you, Honourable Member, and we are working on it.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I first wish to wish the new minister of this very important ministry all the best. I have full confidence that he will do well with his both academic and career background in social policy and in many of the areas of this ministry. Mr. Chair, since we're under constraint of time, I will just make one intervention and say everything I have to say on this one occasion. First, in terms of fire victims, I'd like to know what is really and truly the policy of the ministry in allowing victims of fire to access assistance, financial, food vouchers, and otherwise housing from this ministry and its departments. This is a serious bugbear. It's been mentioned earlier today in this debate. One of the issues I would wish to say in response to what the minister raised is in terms of making a plea for people, landlords, to make their houses available to the ministry in cases of crisis for persons, is that I get the distinct impression, and if I'm wrong, I could stand to be corrected, that there's a delay in paying rent. Victims of fire may be put in a house, and the Ministry of People Empowerment or Welfare agrees to pay the rent, but then 2-3 months after, a landlord waiting for their money. And I mean, landlords are not going to rent places en masse under those kind of conditions if they don't get the money from the ministry in terms of rent that has been agreed. So that certainly has to be looked into. I know that we're operating under financial constraints all around. but that is one of the reasons. But certainly I'd like to know what is the policy of accessing assistance by fire victims, because I have, believe you me, Mr. Chair, it's been like teeth, pulling teeth for my constituents who have had fires. And in many cases, 6 months gone, more than 6 months. They've got maybe a few food vouchers initially, but then unable to access other assistance from the Ministry of People Empowerment or the Welfare Department. And if victims of a fire can't access welfare and financial assistance and cover in a time of crisis, I don't know who can. I commend, yes, the move to amalgamate departments into Department of Children and Family Services. I remember last year during the debate when this ministry was in the well, I mentioned that is something that is of paramount importance. We've had many previous studies on welfare by previous administrations, both political parties which made up the government. I think 4 in all, 2 on either side of the political spectrum, and none of them were implemented. No doubt tens of thousands of dollars spent by previous administrations on these studies. And it's good now that some action is going to be taken. I know the Honourable Member for St. Michael, South Central, asked questions in terms of timelines this morning. I don't believe that all her questions were answered, but I certainly look forward to this department coming into effect and being implemented this year. Because the general trend of this debate, Mr. Chairman, has been that the Welfare Department has not been responsive enough to the needs of Barbadians who need their services. And if it is one thing this department can do in making the ministry and its departments more responsive, it would have served a good purpose. One of the issues I've seen in the documentation submitted by the ministry is that the Welfare Department is still conducting virtual interviews with its clients who have applied for welfare. I see the statement made there's still no in-office face-to-face interviews, and if that is so, I would wish to urge respectfully the minister and his management team to change that. We have to live with COVID. The schools have now gone, children have now gone back to school, and perhaps a month or so too late, but gone back, and we can't continue virtual interviews and not face-to-face. And this has been one of the problems of the Welfare Department, because I certainly have encountered, and speaking with some of my other honourable members, they too, where this has been a serious deterrent, where security guards have been empowered to take information from potential applicants, clients, people who want help, and a security guard, let's face it, with all respect to them, are not trained to do that. So to leave that information with security guards, you can't get past the door. It's not the acceptable situation. I myself, after I had received numerous complaints from my constituents, went to the Welfare Department in Speightstown in, I think it was May last year, to try to test it for myself. And I could see from that experience, and I'm a member of Parliament, and I mean, tell you the truth, like God didn't want to let me in too readily either. And when I went, spoke with the welfare officers, they didn't want to give me information, directed me to the chief welfare officer. I mean, those kind of things not right, because you're paying people. It is taxpayers' money that is paying the welfare officers, and they have to be able to respond. The Honourable Member for St. Peter raised issue earlier today, and he certainly was of the view that members of Parliament should be able to intervene more on behalf of their constituents. And again, I get the impression, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong, that that is not allowed as freely as it should. I agree with the Honourable Member for St. Peter that we are here elected by the people to serve on their behalf. We are going to be we are the first people who are asked by our constituents.
Honourable Member,
that
indeed, we are all here to speak on the behalf of our constituents.
Mm-hmm.
I do not want to rob you of that opportunity.
But I'm going to,
of time,
yeah.
And I will ask you to come to the.
I'm going to land, sir. I'm going to land the plane.
Let us proceed. Thank you.
I'm going to land the plane, sir. That more liberty should be allowed by the Welfare Department to members of Parliament to intervene on behalf of their constituents. And therefore, the training aspect of staff, yes, is extremely key. And Honourable Minister, I know that you have the capacity to lead that and also to lead the issue of communication to the public on these issues. My second question, sir, the first, as I said, is on the policy towards fire victims.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I believe that the Honourable Member has asked me about 6 questions.
No. The first one is on the fire victims issue.
Fire
the
victims,
second one,
landlords, welfare department.
I made a statement on the landlords.
Timelines on family services. Are virtual services still being held? What is the policy with security guards? What is happening with welfare officers and so on? So it's quite a few. So
Honourable Minister,
the only reason I'm intervening. The only reason I'm intervening.
The Honourable Member for St. James North, I think the issue is that you have sort of summarized everything that a number of other spoken, and hence that is a bit confusing to the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, who is now whose ministry is now being examined. So what I want you to do is to state precisely what the questions to the minister and his team are, and let him proceed to answer accordingly.
Okay.
Thank you.
No, the first question was on the fire victims issue, sir. Mr. Chair, the others were statements, essentially. And my second question is on the issue of persons with disabilities. This Parliament passed law that people with disabilities, together with community, people that be involved in community, should get 3% of government procurement, government contracts for matters of a community base. But I know that hasn't been happening in terms of persons with disabilities, and I'm just wondering what is the strategy or policy that will allow us to be able to implement that policy in the future to the benefit of people with disabilities. So just those two questions, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Member. My apologies if I misinterpreted the nature of the questions, but there are some things that were said that I feel without some response to, it would leave a notion in the public that if it goes unattended, perhaps it would do me and the ministry and the staff no favor. So if I could respond very quickly. In relation to the fire issue, we spoke this morning in relation to what our plans are for that there's going to be a 24-hour response unit that we're working very assiduously to be able to set up to make sure that in the event that there are fires, that the response is adequate and that the response is immediate and that the response is long-term, so that in the cases where you spoke of not being able to get assistance immediately afterward or any long-term, to be able to address that. And the minister, the member for St. John had asked about indicators. These are the kind of things that we have to be able to adequately report on. In relation to the timelines on family services and the department when that is coming, I hope to discuss this with my senior minister by next week, present to the Cabinet Subcommittee on Social Policy within the next 2 weeks, the larger Cabinet certainly by the end of next month, hopefully by the middle of next month, and begin the public engagement in relation to that quickly thereafter, and to have a ministry response on family services really before the end of the year. The virtual meetings that we've been having, as you know, the government has had a phase opening, and very soon I suspect you're going to be hearing more about how we're going to be treating to that, but it's going to be government-wide. The question on the role of security guards, well, certainly there is a policy, and the Chief Welfare Officer will speak to these things, I suspect, in great detail very soon. I'm told that only the name of the person and maybe the documents, perhaps, are to be taken, but certainly the name of the person. The question that is being asked in relation to, I must also say I'm an MP too, and I've visited departments, and I know public servants are often very cautious about the way they interact with MPs. They're very, perhaps it is written in the rules, certain engagements and so on, and I think maybe we don't often appreciate how intimidating, having been an officer as well of the public service, it can be sometimes for a public servant to engage with a member of parliament. But these are things that we have to look at. I think the question was asked in another format, how are we going to work with MPs? And this is something that we have to look at going forward. In relation to the question on persons with disabilities, I will again ask the Honourable Member I will ask the Director of the National Disabilities Unit to address the question. I do know that we've spoken to having persons with disabilities benefit from some of these contracts and so on. These are things that I would like to see happen. Of course, we have to work to make sure that they have businesses. We have to work to make sure that, even though the offer is there, that they can be realized. But I will ask the Director of the NDU to speak.
Thank you again, Honourable Minister. As it relates to engaging persons with disabilities in the procurement of contracts to give them opportunities for employment, we are currently in a very intensive process of training persons with disabilities to benefit from contracts. We already, on a limited scale, employ or engage persons with disabilities in some of the services offered by the National Disabilities Unit, specifically catering. Anything that we offer, the National Disabilities Unit that is, and that we know that there are persons with disabilities who can provide the service, we offer them the opportunity to provide that service first and foremost. I cannot speak comprehensively about the wider government policy as it relates to engaging persons with disabilities in the provision or benefiting from government contracts. But certainly within the ministry, we intend to advocate through the various private sector organizations and other commercial enterprises to engage persons with disabilities in the work that they may have on offer. One of the ways that we would want to do that is to complete a register of persons with disabilities with their particular skills. I should also mention too that there are a number of NGOs, non-government organizations, who are training persons in some of the various vocational skills, particularly in some of the technological skills. And once we complete that register of persons and their training, their capacity, we would then be able to share that through to the commercial sector, the private sector, and we are also building a relationship with the Human Resource Management Association of Barbados so that they can help guide us in order to ensure that persons with disabilities are not left on the periphery of the labor force. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. You have the opportunity now to wrap up for the next 10 minutes.
I wouldn't take 10 minutes to wrap up. I want to thank my team. I want to thank the PARLSEC, the PS, the heads who are here for their contribution. I want to thank the members, honorable members, for their very probing questions. They've given me pause on some issues and moments on which I need to reflect and offer solutions to some of the challenges that were raised. I am very thankful for the engagement and for the conversation. There used to be a hymn that we had to sing at school. It says, the rich man in his castle and the poor man at his gate. I've never sung it. I do not subscribe to it. I do not think it is biblical. I do not sing it. I do not subscribe to it. It is not what we practice. The rich man in his castle and the poor man at his gate. No. I think we now have to get to a place where everybody in this country is able to have opportunity. You know, Jesus did say the poor will always be with us, but I think that was meant more as a challenge for us to be able to do more. And therefore, this is the approach that we must take in this ministry. And invariably, it therefore means that it cannot be business as usual as we go forward. This ministry, people empowerment, social development, however you choose to frame it, must be about delivering services to people that are people-centered, you know, policy-driven, people-centered delivery of social services. And on the other hand, it is about empowering people, like a proper development framework looks at how needs are met, how problems are managed, and how opportunities for advancement are given. It's important that we look at all three, not just how needs are met, which is a protection mechanism, not how we just resolve problems, but how we create opportunities for advancement, and that this is part of a wider government approach and a wider societal approach in terms of how we treat to persons. The Ministry of People's Empowerment must not be only and solely about social protection. It has to be about people's empowerment, and that is a paradigm shift in the way that we will approach the ministry and in the way that we will seek to offer services and to empower people in Barbados. There is clearly a view held by some that the attitudes could be troubling. I've given the commitment here that we're going to work on making sure that that is no longer the case, and to make sure that people feel a sense of dignity when they engage with these social services. The challenge that I spoke of, thrown out to me by the Prime Minister before, is for us to complete the circle of enfranchisement. I wanted to do it when I was in fisheries. I know that we need to do it here. There's a large part of the Barbadian society that we will miss. A large part that we will miss if we do not do the things that we are supposed to do. And in missing that part, we miss the talents, we miss the skills, we miss the opportunity, the innovation. There is a large part that we will continue to miss if we stigmatize people, or they are poor, or they're disabled, or they have HIV. Our society must reflect upon these things, because we need to have all of the talents brought to bear on our desire to move Barbados forward. And the idea that Barbados has graduated was the word that we used earlier, while still being so vulnerable to a number of these things, tells me that for all of us to move forward, it must be for all of us to move forward. And that I know if there is a climate event, the persons that we serve will be most affected. Persons can literally run and leave the people that we serve. They can leave the children behind. They can literally run and leave the disabled behind. They can literally run and leave the elderly behind. The people that we serve are not in a position at this point in time often to run and to save themselves. And our society must be built in such a way as to be able to help save them. But that, to me, is the minimum. At a more maximum understanding, beyond just being able to save yourself by running, we have to help people. The parasite spoke of teaching people to fish. I feel as if, you know, we can teach people to fish, but we have to give them access to a very big blue ocean, and that the opportunities that are made available to one must be made available to all. And so it is the thinking of this ministry that we will work with all of our partners. We will work with my colleagues. The persons that we serve are your constituents, so when there's a necessity for housing, we're going to work with the Ministry of Housing. When we look at education, the Ministry of Education. In relation to innovation, with that ministry, labor ministry, more closely, all of the various ministries, to be able to offer the best possible package to Barbadians. And and to make sure that when we do so, that those Barbadians are able to be part of this great Barbadian promise. I still think that Barbados is the best place in the world to grow up, the best place in the world to live. I've said during COVID, it's probably the safest place in the world to catch COVID. And we have much to be proud of, but it cannot be that these benefits redound to some and not to all, and that the promise of this great country must be for every single Barbadian, including the ones that we serve. And so this is my promise, that we will do our best to make sure that people empowerment and elderly affairs really look after people's empowerment and the affairs of the elderly and children and persons with HIV and persons who are poor, and to make sure that that social development promise is realized for all. I want to thank you, sir, for giving me the time. I want to thank my colleagues for being here, and I wish you all a wonderful evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. Honourable Minister, would you please move that the head?
Sorry, Chair. I now move that head 35 stand part.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I therefore beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the Speaker progress and beg leave to sit again.
Beg second.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honour the Speaker and ask for leave to sit again. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Aye. Honourable members against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Chairman of committees has reported progress and asks for leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the sitting until 5:15 p.m.
I'll do what time?
5:15.
Beg second.
The question is that this honourable chairman will be suspended until 5:15 p.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands suspended until 5:15 p.m.